Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Ariel Porilis. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Dundas, and I'm very happy to have the beta group of users today with me. As much as you guys are anxious to get your hands on the new version, know what's happening in Dundas BI 5, we're very anxious to get your feedback. So without any further ado, let's dive right into it. So Dundas BI 5, like any other major release of Dundas, is a major release. There's a lot of new features in it. In fact, there's over 150 new features in Dundas BI 5. A lot of them are based on your feedback, customers' feedback. A lot of them could be spread across the entire application, not just in specific areas of focus that we had for this version. And I think it will enhance your experience working with the application on a day-to-day basis across every operation that you do. So I think you'll see, or some of it you may even not notice, but it will make your life easier when working with Dundas BI. With that, I do want to stress the focus of Dundas BI 5, and that was around the main following three topics, and this is mostly what I'll cover today. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to cover more than 150 new features in a 1-hour session. So we'll focus on the bigger tickets, on the bigger items that I want to highlight with you today. But definitely there's a lot in this version. If you are an experienced Dundas BI developer or user, I do recommend going over the release notes and it will take more than 5 minutes, but take the time to go over the different items in the list and read through it. If you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to us and we can help you and better explain what's new. Hopefully from today's session you understand the focus of what Dundas BI 5 is all about, and as mentioned, it's grouped around those three different categories. The first one is around advanced visual analytics. We want to make sure that you can do even more around visual analytics and take it to the more advanced level in a pain-free way. You'll see a lot of enhancements around the way you can integrate Dundas BI with other systems, with your technology stack, with other applications, and that integration will impact different types of users in the application, not just the administrators or the developers, but even the consumers. And finally, the third topic we've focused on in Dundas BI 5 is around the user experience. We try to delight, again, not just the consumers on this end, but also the administrators, the developers, data analysts. Everybody has something in this version to improve their experience and make sure they can do more of the application in a nicer way. Diving into the first topic, as mentioned, painless advanced visual analytics. What you try to do here is really make sure that more users can get answers to questions, doing that with new interactions, new type of visualizations, new type of functionality, but it's really designed to eliminate the need of going back and preparing data, whether in your data cube or transforming data or doing advanced analytics using coding or R scripts or other type of methods. Just doing it as you go through your analysis, as you use the visual discovery capabilities of Dundas BI, be able to see and find more of your data. And this specific category, as mentioned, there's a lot of features in it, but the top one I want to focus on today is the predictive analytics capabilities that we've introduced with new formulas. So options to do more forecasting or clustering, new type of visualizations, new type of interactions, and even support with heat maps. But instead of talking about all of that, what I really want to do is just to go into Dundas BI and show you all those new things. So let's get started with the new topic, forecasting and clustering option. So here's Dundas BI 5. I believe some of you already had a chance to even download and install it, and I'll just go through the process of showing you how I'm using some of new capabilities. I'm going to create a new metric set and just drag and drop some data in here. So I have some order quantity data. I can bring my order quantities, maybe see it across the different months. As you know from previous versions, Dundas BI will automatically find the best visualization for this type of data. So in this case, it found it chose a line chart for me, which is great. I can see some kind of an order quantity pattern here, but I want to know how my orders or how my order quantity will change in the future. What kind of preparation I need to do, what kind of stock level I need to prepare in my warehouses and with my logistics processes to make sure I'm preparing accordingly to the estimated volume in the future. So up until this version, you had the option to add a trend line here. This would provide you a small forecast into the future. You can expand the length of the forecast. but it was using regression methods, and regression methods are not always the best in terms of predicting the actual order quantity when it comes to different time variation, when you're really trying to take into consideration the patterns and the changes within the different time periods. So as you can see here, I'm getting a straight line projecting an increase in the order quantity in the future, which is probably true, but not necessarily in that time period that the prediction is provided to me. In Dundas BI5, you now have a new option to add a forecast analysis. And if you click on this option, and again, we enable it in a similar way that we enable a lot of different capabilities of your data discovery directly from the Revisualize menu. So if you click on it, what you see here is this nice forecast added to your chart, and this will provide you both the actual forecast line, so that is that blue line here, and then in a lighter blue tone, what you can see here is the confidence level interval, and the default is a 90% confidence level. We expect the value to be in this range across different periods, and you can see this is much more adjusted to my actual values. What you can also see is that this forecast is putting much more weight on the latest values, because the more recent the data is, the more impact or the more accurate your prediction will be if it takes that or provides more weight to that recent data point. So that's one great way of predicting how the information will behave in the future. This is actually based on a new forecasting formula. So you can see those formulas are automatically added to my metric set, and if I open that formula, you can see it's actually using an exponential smoothing formula with a lot of elements in it that Dundas BI automatically computes for you. So I didn't need to be a data scientist or a statistician to understand how to calculate the forecast and what's the optimal method for me to find the best forecast for this data. Dundas BI is actually going through your data set. It's even configurable in terms of how many times it will loop through your data set. So the default is 10 optimizing passes over your data set to make sure that we find the best forecasting values. And through that, then we populate what type of forecasting we want to use. Is it a single, double, or triple exponential smoothing? What kind of alpha, beta, and gamma variables you want to use? And if that doesn't tell you anything, then you can definitely use what I just did in here with this forecasting analysis revisualization option. But if you are familiar with those variables and you want to control it yourself, you can definitely come in here and modify those values, type in this formula, and get maybe a forecast that's adjusted to your specific variables. You can see it's automatically also detecting the season length. So for example, in this case, because I'm using monthly level data, it does detect that I have 12 seasons within my data every year. So definitely a great way to apply analysis without knowing too much about the statistics and the exponential smoothing. And you can see two other formulas here used to calculate my high confidence level margin and my bottom level confidence margin. Now, another thing that we've added in Dundas BI5 is the option to directly interact with the data points just by pointing and clicking. So for example, if I look at this last month data point, I can just right-click on that month. And if I open the filter menu, this will now give me new options to keep this data point that's selected or exclude that selected data point. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to exclude this last month. And now you can see my formula readjusted to compute based on the existing data points I have left in my chart. And now you can see a forecast that obviously doesn't have an impact from the last month that was quite low. Maybe that last month was incomplete, or maybe something exceptional happened that month. But really I want to see how the forecast will behave if the pattern continues as is. And now you can see I'm following a very similar pattern to what you see in the previous month, and again, going upwards. And if I were to extend the prediction length, then I'm expecting to see also that the trend going up afterwards as well. So a great way to forecast how your data will behave in the future, your time-based data. And again, you can do it by adding your own formula, just typing in forecasting, or actually providing specific values in the exponential smoothing formula, or as I just did, go into the Visualize menu and click on Forecast Analysis. The other formula we've added in version 5 is a clustering formula. So I'm going to go again and create a new metric set. And I'm going to use a different data set here, which has just X and Y values. I'm just going to drag and drop those in here. And different IDs. I'm going to visualize this into a table. And what you can see here, I have X and Y values across different sample IDs. So that's good, but really what I want to do in this case is actually be able to see how am I organizing those different data points. Is there any commonality between those different groups that I can associate them as one segment? And once I have that segmentation, once I have those clusters defined in my data, maybe I can take different actions based on the cluster values. For example, if it's my marketing data and these are different groups in my audience, I can now maybe provide different marketing messages or different marketing campaigns to different groups based on those specific characteristics. So let me just go in here, remove that transpose, and add a new formula. So in the formula bar, I can just type in clustering, and now I can just click in the different variables I want to put into my clustering formula. So in this case, I have only the X and Y measures. I can, of course, add as many measures as I have to describe this data, as many variables as I have to describe this data. I can also provide a K value. So the K is basically the number of clusters I expect to have in this data. So behind the scene, this clustering formula, what it's really doing, it's using the K-means algorithm, for those of you who are familiar with that type of a statistical computation, to find how data points or how different samples should match into different clusters. And if I know what the number of clusters should be in advance, I can definitely provide as an input. But if I don't know, similar to the way the forecasting formula is optimized to find the best forecasting formula for me, same thing with the clustering formula. It's designed to find the best K for me based on this data set. So if I leave this empty and just apply that, what will happen now, Dundas BI will look through a data set and again find what's the best number of cluster to describe this data set. So I'm going to get a new column, a new measurement in this data set with the actual cluster ID. So you can see all of these are part of cluster number 14. And as I scroll down, you'll see different number of clusters associated with this data point, with this data set. So here are data points. For example, data point that's identified by ID 326 belongs to cluster number 10. Now, how can I revisualize this data? So I can use it right in here and define the clusters. What I can also do is I can actually go in a data cube and use that same formula like any other formula in a calculated element within the data cube. So here's my data cube, same data set as you saw before, the X, Y, and the ID. Here's a calculated element that is using that clustering formula, providing the same variable, those two measurements I have. And then in the results, I'm going to have the X and Y and then the cluster identified by Dundas BI. Here's the cluster again. So now if I go into a metric set, I can use this data cube I just created, bringing the X and Y, bringing the ID as well. You can see Dundas BI will automatically find the best visualization for this. In this case, a scatter plot. And then all I need to do is go into my visualization binding, expand them more, and here you'll see a color binding where I can bind to it my cluster identification by the formula. And once I do that, you can see very quickly how Dundas BI will automatically color the different groups of data, the different clusters I have with different colors associated with the cluster identification of Dundas BI. So you can see in this case a very good identification of the different clusters by the clustering algorithm. Now, of course, in this case, this is very distinct. It's very easy to see different cluster groups, but sometimes the clusters are not as easy to identify, and this is where the clustering will really help you to find how you want to organize and categorize your data and maybe take different actions based on these different clusters. So these are two new formulas that we've added, really enhancing your predictive analytics capabilities without having to use R, which was the previous way of doing it in Dundas BI. You can still use R if you're comfortable in R. There's even more enhancements that we've added in this version. I'll talk about those later on, around using maybe different types of languages to go and define those different types of computations. But right now in this version, you don't even have to use those things. You can either right-click revisualize or introduce a new formula and use that in your computation. The next area of enhancements around advanced visual analytics is new types of visualizations. And the first one I want to show you is the one that's focusing on relationship visualizations. So I'm going to bring in my order quantity here, and I'm going to bring it and organized by different product IDs. So you can see here product IDs and different order quantities. You can see we've actually added a nice header here to show me the scale for the different product IDs order quantity. And what I want to do here is actually group and organize my data by different hierarchies. So I have this product hierarchy in here. Just going to bring it here and organize my data by those different products. So now what I can do in SPI 5 is I can actually go in here, and there's new types of visualization we've added in the relationship area of the application. So we already had relationship diagram before, we had Sankey diagram, and now we've added two more types of relationship visualizations. The first one I want to show you is the tree diagram. So when I use the tree diagram, what you can see here is a very neat way of organizing my data across the different branches. So for example, here I can see all the values break down into those 4 different categories: accessories, bikes, clothing, components. And I can now right-click and expand the different levels and go to the next level. So here I expand accessories. I can do the same with any other level of choice. This can be very handy if you're trying to maybe visualize organizational charts, if you try to visualize a bill of material, if you want to see the flow of the hierarchical values, but not necessarily give a focus to the volume of each values in the flow, like the Sankey diagram, but just focus on the different paths available to you in the data. Very neat way. There's of course properties on that you can control. You can auto zoom to fit this. You can control the layout, maybe have this vertically presented. And of course, like any other visualization, it's very, very interactive. You can go into each one of those, drill down, expand, collapse, and visualize the data as needed. There's even a visualization binding that allows you to bind images into those different data points. And this is where you can even create organizational charts with the different image of the different individuals working in your organization as well. Or maybe the product images right in here as well, if that's something you want to do as part of your tree diagram. So that's one type of a visualization we've added in version 5. Another type of visualization we've added in version 5 is one focused on chord diagram, basically a visualization that's designed to help you visualize relationships in data. So what I'm going to do in here, I'm going to create a new metric set and drag and drop some data here of telecom companies' data. So this is a data set, it's fictitious data, not real data, of telecom companies in the US, big telecom providers, and you can see here the source company and the destination company and the churn value between those different companies. You can see how many subscribers, network subscribers, move from one company to another. Maybe one way that a lot of people will go about visualizing this is using this type of pivot table where they have the original company on the left-hand side, the destination company as the columns, and then comes those data bars showing how many subscribers move from one company to another. But maybe a better way to visualize this would be using this new core diagram. So if I go into the visualize, choose the core diagram, what I can see here is at first a visual that maybe some of you are not very familiar with, so seems a bit convoluted, but once you know how to read this, it's actually very, very powerful. What you can see here, and as you hover over it, you can see a highlighting of the specific path or specific chord I'm focusing on. You can see kind of the stream of data from one source to another. So in this case, my source is the US cellular provider, and the target is Sprint. And I can see that the 4,072 subscribers moved from US cellular provider to Sprint, and 3,555 moved from Sprint to US cellular. So I can see both the bidirectional path. I can see in this case it's almost the same. But if I were to focus on, for example, this path, this chord, I can see that from Sprint to AT&T, I had almost 3,000 subscribers moving. However, the other way around, from AT&T to Sprint, I only had 8 subscriber moving. So that's obviously a very successful year for AT&T, where they managed to do successful campaigns moving Sprint customers to their network without losing customers going back to Sprint. And that's something that would be harder for me to identify in the standard pivot table I was showing you earlier. So if you have one-level hierarchies and you want to visualize the interrelationship between those different hierarchy members, that's a very powerful way of doing that with this core diagram. Now, the next area that I want to show you is around new type of interactions that you can use on the data to basically group your data in a very custom way. And there's two things I want to show you here. The first one, I'll bring in some data here from a certain table. I have my sales territory, and what I want to see in my sales territory is basically the different countries I sell to. Let's see if, fortunately I have too many connectors here, and some of those are using the older credentials. Apologies about that. This is one of those. Okay, I think I need to use the middle one. Yeah, that's the right one. Okay, so in this case, I can see here different countries and the sales year to date for those different countries. Okay. Now, in many cases, when I'm analyzing data and trying to see information across different categories, some of the categories are really categories that belongs together. For example, in this case, maybe France and Germany are two categories I want to really analyze as a single group because they're both EU-based countries. Now, up until this version, what you would typically do in that case, you would go back to the data cube level, provide a calculate element with some kind of an if statement, and within that if statement, you would check if the data is belonging to France or Germany, and then create a new group for it. But in Dundas BI5, what you can do is you can just select those two different data points, right-click, and use these group member options. And now you can just provide a name for it. So this could be the EU. Create that, and now you'll see a new series in your data reflecting EU. And I can, of course, ungroup it. And this will work with all the different types of interactions as well in your data. So for example, if I go in and sort my data now by the sales, I can see now by the top leading sales region. And maybe I want to group not just the EU countries, but all the European countries, the UK, France, and Germany together. I can then go and group those members. I call this Europe, for example. I can also choose individually. I don't have to do it visually from the chart. And once I apply that, you can now see in the chart an update with my top category now, which is the European category. If I'm the European sales manager, I maybe want to be able to see all those countries together in one visual. Any other formula that I have derived from this chart, derived from this set of categories and measurement will also be updated based on that new grouping. So a very quick way to visualize and analyze data and discover it without having to go back to the data preparation layer. Another way of going about it, let me ungroup this again, and let's revisualize this to maybe a different type of visual. Let's say I have a pie chart. Now in this pie chart, I probably have too many slices to be able to easily focus on the different groups that matter. One other way of grouping the data would be based on the values. So I can go into my metric set, click on the edit, and next to where we used to be able to define the top and bottom measures, which you can still do, you now have a new option to define an other group measure. And if I choose the sales year-to-date measure, what I can do here is I can say, well, look at my values and define based on a fixed value or a percentage or a positional element in terms of how many positions I want to take, what would be the way I'll be grouping values into another category. So for example, in this case, I'm going to define an upper boundary of 6 million. And everything below 6 million will now be grouped into an others category. So now I can see 52% of my sales year-to-date belongs to other smaller countries, and these are all the countries that goes beyond above 6 million and represent a bigger group in my data. Again, something that they in previous version I had to go back to the data cube and prepare data for and do it that way. And as mentioned, it doesn't have to be based on a fixed value. It can also be maybe based on percentage. So I can say everything which is below 10% will be grouped into the others. And now I can see another country that is above 10% that didn't make it through a previous cut. In this case, Australia, that was selling less than 6 million, but more than 10%. So you can see very quickly I'm able to group and organize the data that way. Okay, moving on to the next topic around the advanced visual analytics. I showed you earlier the way I can right-click a data point, go into the filter, and choose to keep that selected data point or exclude it. That can also be, by the way, to a number of data points. It doesn't have to be to a single data point, so I can do it now visually directly from the chart. Other new type of selection interactions that are now available, you'll see in the properties of the different visuals. So let me go and add this visual to a dashboard. And if I go into the properties, you can see here there's a selected data change interaction. So that's a new interaction you can now use. And again, you can of course apply it with all the different types of interaction we supported up until version 5. I can fire a filter interaction in here, a drill down, a change layer, a navigate interactions, a pop-up, or even my own custom script that will be triggered or fired whenever I'm selecting a number of data points. Again, very powerful when you want to create a custom user experience based on what the user is doing when it's pointing and clicking on different visuals in the dashboard. Now, finally, the last option I want to show you around Advanced Visual Analytics is the new options to create heat maps. So let me go in here and create a new map visualization. And let's take a bit more space on this dashboard to visualize that. And if I go into my data set here, I have a data set here with crime locations across the Vancouver area in Canada. And the crime in this case is vehicle stolen. So basically, each data point in this data set represents a stolen vehicle in a certain location, and I have that location identified by the latitude and longitude of that specific vehicle where it was when it was stolen. So I can just go into my binding of this visual, and what I'll do here is connect those lat and long coordinates into my symbols. I'm just going to drag and drop the longitude and then the latitude. And finally, I'm going to bring in the ID as well. So the ID will represent each incident of stolen vehicle in different locations. You can see the symbols are drawn on the map. Each data point, each symbol on this map is actually representing a stolen vehicle. So right now there's a lot of symbols, a lot of points. It's actually quite hard to tell what's going on here. If I go and view this thing, I can definitely zoom in further. Like all the other maps, it will allow you to zoom in a bit further in and out. You can see the layers changing as I go on, but it won't be very easy to actually understand what's going on here. You just see a lot of different points in different locations. Now, what I can do with these new options of the heat map is I can just go into my visualization properties of this visual, and directly from those I can actually bind the data not to represent each event in a single point, but actually to represent the density of the different events. So I can just add another measure here to my heat map visualization binding of this visual. And what will happen now is that the map will recalculate the symbols display and will now allow me to see the density of those different events. And of course, you can see a big red dot in that Vancouver area, but as I go in and zoom into it, you can now actually see the spread of those events across different locations, across different neighborhoods of Vancouver and the surroundings. And I'll start zooming in, and now you can see those different dense areas changing and moving in to the specific locations. Now, the other thing you can notice that as I drill down, it's kind of hard to see the boundaries of the map. At some point, the map doesn't go to that granularity that you need to be able to analyze the information almost down to the street level. So this is actually a good segue to the next area of innovations in version 5, and what that will be is basically the ability to hook up the map to any preferred map provider that you use in your organization. So we don't limit you, we don't predefine a map provider that you'll be using to visualize data at different levels. We actually allow you to choose the one that your organization is currently using today, and that list is actually pretty open. What we use behind the scenes to integrate into different map providers is actually a Leaflet engine. So if you're familiar with Leaflet, basically it can integrate to almost any map provider out there. All you need to do now is to go into the properties of this map, and then check this option to show street level maps, and open this Dropbox here and choose either a predefined map provider that we provide the information for. Some of them will require additional credentials, such as Bing Maps, for example, will require an API key, so you can just provide that in the properties. But some of them are completely available to you out of the box. For example, if you use a Cardo or ArcGIS, you can definitely just choose that. DownSPI will automatically populate the map provider URL for you, but again, you can choose the one that you want specifically, add provider options, add your own attributes. Of course, you'll need to comply with the license agreement of those different map providers. And as I choose this option, you can now see my map visualizing information down to the street level. So for example, if I zoom in now, you can see the actual information of the different neighborhoods or different locations all the way down to the street level. So if I'm planning to buy a house in the Vancouver area, I can now definitely decide between the different neighborhoods and see which one will be the right one for me if a stolen vehicle is a big consideration for me. So a great way to visualize a lot of information. It will actually render even faster if you use the heat map versus the
point-by-point symbol allocations, because what the algorithm will do, it will find the density of those different locations and show it together as one point. And of course, like any other visualization or element in the visualization in SPI, there's a lot of options to configure here. You can go into the heat map styling and control the gradients, the point radius, blur radius, maximum and minimum value, and play with the way your heat map is being displayed.
So let's move on to the next topic in the interest of time, just to make sure we cover everything today. The next area of enhancements of Dundas BI 5 is around simplified system integration, and really it's designed to simplify the integration across all different types of users. So it can be for data analysts, for example, users that are comfortable using not just R but also using Python or just Python. Python is becoming a more and more popular language for advanced statistics, machine learning, deep learning algorithms. There's lots of libraries available in Python, and I think it's becoming more and more popular, even surpassing R, because it's not just designed for data scientists, but lots of programmers know Python from different exercises they do, not specifically just for advanced statistics and machine learning. So as this language becomes more and more popular, we've decided to integrate that into Dundas BI natively, similar to the way that the R is integrated into Dundas BI. So if you are familiar with the R language analysis transformation in DataCube, you have a new one now for Python, and that includes not just the option to integrate your Python transformation within your data flow, as you can see in this image here, where I have a query using the Dundas BI native transformations, and then in between the process results and the query, I have my Python analysis transformation with my own Python script, but it can also be used to generate data. And Python contains lots of libraries connecting to many different types of data sources out there, and you can even initiate your data process directly from a Python script and then visualize the results in Dundas BI. So that's geared obviously towards data analysts or data scientists that wants to use Python to do even more advanced statistics. The second area of enhancements for the system integration is a very popular request that we had around incremental data storage. So if you are using Dundas BI data cubes, and within your data cubes, you are defining the data cube to be stored in your warehouse or in the Dundas BI in-memory engine. So let's say, for example, you chose here to store this data cube in the warehouse. You'll see under the configure setting option, a new option to perform an incremental build. And the value of this option is that it really allows you to now reduce the query load on your source databases or on your data sources. So instead of pulling all the data every time you're trying to build your data cube, you would actually just pull whatever changed since the last time and insert that into the existing data that we already pulled in previous times. And you can do that based on time. So Dundas BI will check what was the last date value that we had data for in our data cubes, and based on that we'll query whatever is available to you in your data sources just above that date. Or it can be based on some kind of a numeric field. For example, you have a certain ID that identifies records that you insert into a certain table, and if there's a new ID inserted into your database, Dundas BI will pull that only and will insert that into the existing storage that we have. So that's around incremental data storage. Definitely will help you to reduce the loads on your operational databases, minimize the querying time, and therefore have a shortened time to rebuild data cubes as you go along with your scheduled updates of the data that you want to provide to your users. The enhancements is around connecting to new data sources, and we have two new data types or data connections, data connectors available to you in Dundas BI 5. One is a native DB2 connector. So up until this version, users used to use ODBC to connect to DB2. Now there's a native connector for DB2. But aside from DB2, we have a new JDBC connector. So similar to our ODBC connector that allows you to connect to any data source with an ODBC driver, the JDBC allows you to connect to any data source that has a JDBC driver and no ODBC driver. So if you have any of those data sources, usually around big data environment, Hadoop-based environment that has JDBC drivers and no ODBC drivers, you can definitely start leveraging that new type of connector and consume the data source directly as well in Dundas BI. And of course, like any other data connection, you can interact with it and use it the same way as any other data source. Finally, not much to show for this new enhancement, but they definitely can show in your bottom line of the total cost of ownership. Postgres-based deployment. So you no longer have to depend on SQL Server as your application and warehouse database for Dundas BI. When you install Dundas BI now, you can use Postgres as your database. Postgres, for those of you who don't know, is an open source database. So obviously you can eliminate the cost of the licenses that you would pay to Microsoft for a SQL Server, or go beyond the limitation that you would have SQL Server Express if you use that so far, and use Postgres SQL as your backend database for the application. Of course, if you've developed so far work and you have, if you're a beta user on a backend that's using SQL Server, you can now use the import-export functionality to migrate your work from Dundas BI 4 into Dundas BI 5 based on a PostgreSQL database backend. Now, the last area I want to cover today is what we did around the user experience, and really try to delight customers not just around consuming of data, so not just the standard users, but also the analysts, the developers, even the administrators. They all have something that will make their life easier when they try to access data, analyze data, prepare data, or just consume it. So again, I'll try to stay more in the application rather than the PowerPoint here. So let me go in and show you the first area. So the first area is actually a new homepage that we've created in the Dundas BI 5. And what you can see here in this homepage is that we've moved all the content creation tiles that we had before to the left-hand side. So we still have those one-click shortcuts to a popular item, such as exploring data or creating new dashboards or new hierarchies or accessing the administration. But now we provide much more a greater focus on data consumption. So being able to visually see what information was available. And you can see that all the dashboards that were checked in, these are dashboards that are visually displayed to me here. And dashboards that I've never checked in, these are the ones that are still in blue. So across the different projects, you can see different elements where I have more checked in dashboard versus others. And as I scroll down, you can kind of see this breadcrumb here at the top, updates. So you can see I'm scrolling upwards now. You can see now I'm looking at a project called Gartner, and under that product I have dashboards, and then I have a folder called Other. And of course I can click on the dashboard here area and navigate directly to here. I can switch to different areas, and of course I can search across all the different projects. So for example, I can search for all the map elements. In this case, I have those maps in the Getting Started Dundas BI project. Or I can go in and filter on a specific project I want to focus on, and then apply the search and get elements just in that project I'm filtering on. Now, beyond the visual view, I also have a list-based view. And in this list-based view, I can see the different dashboards, a very small thumbnail for the dashboard that's available to me that are checked in. And then I can see who created those dashboards, when they were created, and when they were last modified. So kind of useful information to better understand what's the status of those different elements. So this is the new home screen which applies to all users. Of course, I can still customize my home screen the way I was able to do so before, and just choose the dashboards I want to have on my home screen, or the different elements, metric sets, reports, even data cubes. If I'm a developer, I can have those available to me directly on my home screen. Now, not just consumers are getting a new landing page, also administrators. So if I go to the administration area of Dundas BI, what you can see in here now is a new landing page for administrators. Very useful information they can get here. So you can see, for example, how many jobs failed in the last 24 hours. They can click on view here, get the list of jobs. They can see that in this case, on this instance, I have 12 invalid licenses. And they can click on view and access directly those specific licenses and see why they're not valid and so on. I can see information about when my license will expire. So I can prepare accordingly and make sure I have a new license in place. I can see information around the version I'm using, active sessions right now in the environment, how many accounts I've used it in the past 24 hours. I can see the last logins, tenants I have configured on this environment, how many servers and server groups. Key information about the server that can also help you when you try to analyze information, or if you're working with the support team and you're requested to provide some details. And at the bottom, you can also see monitoring about the CPU usage of the server and the memory usage of the server Dundas BI is installed on. So you can see the total CPU server load, how much of that is actually consumed by Dundas BI. So this is the application pool usage of the CPU. And same thing with the memory. So you can see on this memory, on this server, I have 8 gigabytes of RAM, and I can see out of the 8 gigabytes, Dundas BI is consuming 0.6 gigabytes of RAM for Dundas BI. So very useful information here for administrators in the environment. The next area that we provide around superior user experience, that's more for the developers creating data cubes. So if I would go in here and create a new data cube, what you would see now is a very handy way for me to better understand the information as I go along and apply different transformations to my data. So I could always click on the different transformations and open the data preview and see the different elements, the tables and the preview of the data available to me in this data preview window. But what I have now as well is some key statistics I'm showing to the user, to the developer creating this data cube that will help him better analyze and understand the data as he transforms it. So for example, I can see now that I have 5,303 records, and if I click on the statistics, it tells me, okay, for the continent column, I have 3 distinct values, so that means I have 3 different continents. For the country, I have 6 different countries. This is the minimum data I have in the system and the maximum data I have in the system. I can also see specific statistics describing my measurements. So I can see what's the total sum, what's the average, the minimum, maximum, and this basically helps me identify how accurate my data is, how clean it is, what type of transformations I need to do as I go along. So for example, if I were to insert here a filter transformation, and let's say I were to filter my country, and I would say I want to see only data that is not equal to France, so I want to exclude France from my data. So again, if I open my data preview, here I have 5,323 records under the first selection, and if I click on the filter transformation, now I only have 4,569 records, and if I open that, I can see I only have 5 distinct countries versus 6 as I had before, because I obviously excluded France. So a very good way for me to validate and make sure that whatever transformation I'm applying to the data is accurate and helping me to shape my data correctly. 2 more areas I want to highlight in the user experience. So first of all, any user now can access past exports they've created in their data. So if I go into my profile and open this new export dialog, I can now see, okay, well, on November 28th, I've created an export of this dashboard, and I can actually go in and download this export again. I don't have to go into the dashboard and regenerate this export that I've created in the past. What I can also use it for is I can actually compare values as data changes. So if I wanted to create kind of an historical snapshot of the values at a certain point in time, I can create an export and then come back today, go and access that previous export and compare to the values I have currently in the dashboard. The other thing this export dialog is useful for is I can see any queued report exports I have. Right now I don't have any, but if I were to export a lengthy report or a dashboard that takes some time, I don't have to wait for that export to be completed. I can just go in here and export, keep on working in the system, go back to this exports dialog, and either see it in my queued exports or if it's completed in my export history, and then access the exported file from there. Finally, the last thing I want to show you around the superior user experience is greater fine-grained control that we provide now with the different elements in your dashboards and in the application level. So first of all, at the application level, you now have a new property that allows you to control which type of exports you want to provide to users. So you can, for example, say, well, my users will only be able to export to Excel. I never want to give them the options to export to PowerPoint, PDF, image, or a link. You can turn those things off. The other thing you can do is you can actually control the way the users will interact with this dashboard. So for example, here I have this map, and I can say at the dashboard level, you know what, on this map, I don't want users to be able to add a note, or I don't want users to be able to revisualize this map altogether. I can do that at the dashboard level, or I can do it at a specific control level. So I can say, for this type of visualization, for this type of map, beyond just being able to control the options I have at the application level, I can also control what revisualization options I have. So maybe I want to say, well, for this data, I want to be able to go to a table, a bar, as well as a map, but I don't want to be able to revisualize to any other type of option. So now if I go and view this data, you can see when I right-click, I don't have the option to add any notes. And when I open the Revisualize menu, these are the only 3 types of visualizations I can go to. So I don't need any script. I don't need any custom overrides. I can just apply that at the specific individual control level versus at the user account profile level, which was sometimes limiting, because sometimes you want to have some visualizations available to visualize to any type of visualization, but some only to a specific set of predefined elements, and now you can easily do that with a few different clicks. Okay, so that covers the main area of innovations in Dundas PI5. I do apologize for the time we lost in the middle. Last but not least, I want to highlight some of the popular user requests that we had coming into this version, and highlight some of those that we've introduced in this version. So thank you again for all the great feedback you provide. We keep on listening to you and making sure we try to incorporate as much as possible in the application. I know some popular requests were around being able to set up dependent filters without using hierarchies, so now you can very easily do that, create two different filter controls and have the list of values showing in each filter control based on the selection of the other one, even if a hierarchy is not defined between them. You can now set up data-driven notification on an entire column. So if you've used data-driven notification so far, it was only to specific cells you've defined. Now you can choose all the cells I have available for a certain measurement, for a certain condition. I want to fire a notification for that if that condition exists. You'll see a lot of enhancements around the loading time of reports and scorecards. We've managed to drastically reduce the number of queries reports and scorecards consume back from the database, and therefore reduce the loading time for reports. In some cases, we've seen heavy reports that used to take upwards in 45 seconds to render, now rendering in about 10 seconds. So great savings there if you're a users of reports and scorecards. You'll see easier ways to administer access permissions, what's allowed, what's denied to a user, what's inherited, making that the entire process much easier. Things as being able to show tooltips across multiple series in a single hover, being able to pass multiple values back to the AQ placeholders, and the list goes on and on. A lot of new enhancements we've added based on your feedback. As mentioned, I do encourage you to read the release notes and see what applies to your request or what could be valuable for you going forward. Okay, we have about 1 minute left at the top of the hour. I will extend this session. If you can stay on, please stay on and feel free to ask your questions. I will try to cover as many questions as possible. Again, I apologize about the delay. But if you have to drop off, the last thing I want to leave you with is how to go about this beta. So if you're in this webinar, you probably already accessed the beta testing experience in the cube. And in here, you'll see a lot of different challenges helping you to better learn and engage with the beta versions, find what's new. There's a nice also a set of prizes to win as well if you are really active in this beta program and trying a lot. So we do encourage you to share your feedback as much as possible. This is not obviously the final version for the retail release, so the earlier you give us feedback, the better we can incorporate that in this new version. And this will also incorporate links to the key highlights of this version, some of the things I mentioned today on the website. You can also go into the support site, read the full list of changes or the main area of what's new. There's of course full support documentation showing you how to use the different areas of Dundas PI5 and apply that in your beta testing and how you would use that in the environment. Okay, so with that, I'll now open up the floor for questions and try to tackle those as much as possible. Again, if you have to drop off, we definitely understand that. Feel free to email us and we can get back to you afterwards with answer those different questions. Okay, so there's a question here if I can elaborate on the ability to set states without using a measure. So yeah, absolutely, I can maybe even quickly try and show that. So if I go in here, let me create a new visualization. And let's say I have a visualization here that show the different list of countries I have in my data. I don't have any measurement in here. Previously, in previous version, I had to have a measurement to set up states. Now in this version, I can go in here, set up some states, and I don't have to choose a measure. I can leave it on none. Let's say provide some default name. and let's just provide a bad state here. And the bad state could be if my value is equal to, let's say, France again. Sorry, I'm picking on France today. But if my value is equal to France, it's going to be a bad value. And if I click on the visual button here, that they should highlight all the values for that specific countries. Let's add something in here. Okay, here we go. So now if I had multiple measures, I didn't have to bind all the measures and create conditions to all of those. I can just create a condition once across just the dimension, and that will apply across all the measurements I have in my data. Okay, there's questions here on any improvements on how we can change data sources without breaking metric sets. So I believe that's not necessarily something new to this version. That's something that we had in previous versions as well. So even prior to version 5, starting from version 4 actually, we offered a way to rewire data, and that's this option here that is called a replace source cube. So with the replace source cube, you can now basically point this metric set to use a different data cube that is providing a similar structure of data, basically in this case a measurement and a dimension, but that's again not new necessarily to version 5. Okay, so there's a question on how to exclude the different share options. So that's available to you under the admin options. If you go to setup config, what you'll see in here, if you you can just search for export, and what you'll see here is allowed export providers. So if you open this property, you can now choose which export providers you support now in the application. So for example, if I were to choose only Excel and CSV, this will hide the PDF, image, and PowerPoint options from the users to export to. So that's how I control the share options. Question on the interdependent filters or dependent filters, how does that work? So yeah, I can definitely show that one. Let's go to a new dashboard. And I'll use again the same data set. Just because I think it's very easy to understand the concept on this data set. I'll bring in, I have the country as my rows, and I have the continent as my slicers. I'm going to add a couple of filters here, one for the country, one for the continent. And let's say I don't have a hierarchy defined between the two. I'm purposely using those two different dimensions because everybody knows what country should belong to which continent. But really, in this case, usually what you would define is a geography hierarchy. But in other cases, you may have countries and products. And in that case, you don't know necessarily what products are available to sell in different countries from the top of your mind. And this is where the dependent filters can help. So how do you set it up? You just go to the connect filter options, dependent filters, and just check the filter you want it to be dependent of. And you can do it both ways. So if I go in here, I can have this one dependent of filter 1. And now if I choose, for example, just Canada in here, you can now see that the continent only contains North America. And if I go back to all values in here and just choose Europe here, you can see that this filter now only contains the European country. So very quickly, I can now set up this type of a dependency between the filter without having to define a user hierarchy. Okay, there's a questions here on on-the-fly grouping. What user type can do the grouping for the on-the-fly? So that is a capability that is reserved for the analysts. So basically, power users in the systems are the one that they will be power users and developers, of course, will be the one that they will be capable of accessing the on-the-fly grouping. And is it saved for all the users only for that specific instance? So it is saved at the metric set level. So everywhere you've defined grouping in a certain metric set, everywhere that metric set is being used, you'll be able to see that they define grouping. If you want to define the grouping at the data cube level, you would do it the way you've done it so far, using calculator elements, using some kind of a logic in data cube. But at the metric set level, that's definitely saved and reusable across the application. Okay, question here, have the system requirements changed at all for version 5? Slightly, not much. we extended some of the options. So if you want to use a different application database and not SQL Server, then as I mentioned before, you can now use Postgres SQL. You don't have to use SQL Server anymore. So from that point of view, we have widened the system requirements. On the SQL Server end, we did the update as well the minimum version. So up until this version, you could use SQL Server 2008 R2. Starting from this version, you need to use SQL Server 2012 and above as your application database for Dundas BI if you're using SQL Server. So these are the major changes around system requirements. If you use Python, you obviously want to install the Python engine on your server, similar to the way you would install R. But that's, again, only if you want to use that capability. Okay, questions here. Does the share options have to be done on the entire instance level, or can it be done at the user or dashboard level? So unlike the revisualize or the ability to control what privileges the users have at the dashboard at the control level, the share options is at the application level. But if you wanted to do it at the user or dashboard level, that's something you can do the way you could have done it before, just with a simple CSS override and just hide those options from the user at that level. Okay, good questions here about the incremental data storage. What happens when the previous data is deleted? So that's a great question. So the incremental data storage is designed to handle insert cases. So if you have new data coming in and you want to insert that data, that's where the incremental is of great use. If you have cases where you need to handle deleted data or updated data, so for example, if your previous record changes or if you have all the records that they were deleted, in that case, incremental will not cover those areas. So you want to make sure that you clean up your data storage, or you don't use the incremental altogether, and you just query for the full data set every time you build a data cube. That would be the safest way to go about it. But if you know you have a data set that is just incrementing with new data, and you're not going backwards and updating values or deleting values, then using the incremental to insert only those new records, only the delta, is definitely a good way to go. Okay. I think we've covered most of the questions in the sessions, and we already eaten up more of the time that you have. Again, as mentioned, really anxious to get your feedback on this version, so feel free as you go in, as you play around with the different functionalities and features, provide as much feedback as possible. The cube and the experiences and the challenges in the cube is the best platform to do so, but if you want to do it directly with us on the call, if you want to send us an email outside the cube as well and interact with us like that, we're definitely open to have that. Welcoming your feedback and trying as much as possible to incorporate that in the application going into the retail version. So thank you again, everybody.